So what causes sex addiction? One word, training. Let me explain. The sex addict was trained to lie, to hide, to be selfish, to compartmentalize, and to live in shame, not because he's evil, but because that's what he learned. That's what he had to do to function and even in some cases survive. He was trained to use sex to feel better about himself despite terrible consequences. Hey, I'm Perra, and if you are struggling with sex or porn addiction, or you love someone who is, you need to understand this. Sex addiction, although not recognized as a formal diagnosis by the American Psychiatric Association or the World Health Organization, but the symptoms, most definitely, they are real and they are devastating, and that's what the sex addict needs to treat. Today, I'm going to break down what actually causes sex addiction biologically, psychologically, culturally, and behaviorally, and I'm going to reframe the entire thing for you because this isn't just about sex. It's about unmet needs, poor coping strategies, and how boys grow into men without ever learning how to meet their needs, both sexual and non-sexual, proactively, so their needs get met reactively, the way they were trained. And when I say training, I'm talking about repeated patterns, rehearsed behaviors, conditioned responses burned into the nervous system. Just like you train to juggle a soccer ball, your environment with your biology trains your brain and your body. Every thought, every reaction, every behavior trained. Let's start with biology. Men are biologically wired for variety, and most of us are living in a monogamous society. We're more visually stimulated. We tend to have higher libidos than women. Now, that's not an excuse, that's biology. Now, biology is not destiny. It's just one piece of the puzzle, but that biology is an important piece. Now, let's get to the environment, and here's where things get real. As boys, men learned that pleasure was a way to escape pain. We didn't learn to process emotions, we learned to numb them and stuff them down. And guess what works really, really well to numb emotions and to create that puff of validation or significance? Porn, masturbation, and sexual fantasy. We also learn that sex equals significance. It equals conquest, worth. And here at The Mindful Habit, we have a saying, it's not the sex, it's the significance. And when you don't feel significant, you chase anything that makes you feel like a man. And to make matters worse, sex wasn't talked about when we were kids, or it was shamed, or both, so we hid it. And the hiding became part of the experience. The lying started early, the secret started early, the shame started early, the training started early. And this is before we even touch trauma, physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse. All of these can cause future compulsive sexual behaviors. So we have this powerful sexual part of us. It grew up in isolation, in darkness, reactive, alone, and isolated. And what wires together fires together, and the training sticks. So yes, the sex addict was trained to be selfish, trained to use sex to self-soothe, trained to lie, to compartmentalize and lack empathy, trained to minimize his partner's pain, trained to justify the secret sexual life, trained to measure his worth by sexual validation, trained to feel shame, and then trained to stuff it down. And this training creates the right conditions for sex addiction. Over time, sex becomes both a coping mechanism and a reward. A hit of power when you feel powerless, and a hit of worth when you feel worthless. And as a result of this training, so often you have underlying mental health issues like depression, anxiety, OCD, borderline traits and narcissistic tendencies, bipolar disorder, ADD and ADHD, and a lot of sex addicts realize that they are hypersensitive. The more severe the addiction, the deeper the wound. The deeper the wound, the greater the ability to compartmentalize, the greater the capacity to lie, and the deeper the pain. And that's one of the biggest failures of traditional sex and porn addiction treatment. All the talk about sex consumes the oxygen in the room, and the root causes, they get ignored. And that's terrible because this is not primarily a sexual issue. It is an integrity issue, a coping issue, a systemic issue that is inflamed not just by childhood trauma, it's also fueled by non-sexual environmental stressors, like someone with a high-stress job, someone getting poor sleep on a terrible diet, marital conflict inflames it, a partner with a lower sex drive certainly makes these issues more complicated, someone who has a lack of purpose, and someone with no healthy hobbies. The sex addiction and porn addiction becomes the hobby. The sex addict must learn to meet those needs proactively, and that's the good news. Just like the sex addict was trained, he can be retrained. That liar, that selfish part, that insecure, secretive, shame-filled little boy that you talked about in therapy can be retrained, right? These parts aren't evil. They are waiting and craving for self-leadership. While the causes of sex addiction is complex, the solution is also complex, but allow me to grossly oversimplify for purposes of this video. The solution, cure for your sex addiction and porn addiction is the aggressive pursuit of a great life. Not avoidance, not shame, not just stop it, not blocking software, not just admitting you're powerless, but a retraining of your mind and body, a rewiring of your central nervous system, a system of self-leadership, self-control, and a healthy sexuality rooted in integrity. And that's what we teach here at The Mindful Habit, because that is what works. So, if you are living a double life, if you're tired of hiding, remember this: you weren't born broken, you were trained, and now it's time to retrain. This is the scene in the movie where Rocky caught the chicken and that bell goes off. It is time to retrain. So subscribe, like, comment. Let's blow up the shame and build a better conversation. So tell me in the comments, what's one thing you were trained to do that no longer serves you? And if you want to accelerate and deepen your journey, check out The Mindful Habit. Join the new sexual revolution where we recognize that our sexual energy is powerful, and with great power comes great responsibility. If you need help wielding that power to create a great life, visit www.mindfulhabithelp.com. I'm Craig Perra, and I will see you in the next lesson. Bye.